And we will get started in just a moment. Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn, Maine's Community Resilience Partnerships. 75 communities are participating in the first round of grants and assistance from the Community Resilience Partnership. Brian Ambrette is the Senior Climate Resilience Coordinator at the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation and the Future, GOPIF. And Brian is with us today to share how your community could be part of the second round to access funding and direct support to reduce carbon emissions, transition to clean energy, and become more resilient to climate change effects, such as extreme weather, flooding, rising sea levels, and public health impacts. Welcome, Brian. My name is Kathleen Neal. I am the Director of Policy and Partnerships here at Maine Conservation Voters and Maine Conservation Alliance. Our organizations represent more than 13,000 members and supporters dedicated to protecting Maine's environment and our democracy. MCA does that through education, collaboration, and advocacy, and MCV by influencing public policy, holding politicians accountable, and winning elections. A few technical notes for today. We'll hear from Brian first and then tackle your questions in the Q&A session at the end. You don't have to wait though. You can send those questions to me through the chat whenever they occur to you, and I'll keep track of them to ask Brian at the end. We ask that you not message speakers directly as we want their focus on the presentation, not the chat box. Please message Will Sedlak if you have any technical difficulties and he will help you out. This event is being recorded and the video will be posted on our website later this afternoon, where you can also find recordings of all of our previous programs. Thank you again for joining us, and Brian, I will turn it over to you. You are still muted, Brian.
All right, it should be fixed now.
There we go. All right.
There we go.
Just needed permission to talk. All right, I am going to grab my slides here, and are you able to see all that?
We sure can.
Looks great.
Super. All right. Well, it's fantastic to be back with you all. Thank you, Kathleen, for the introduction. I'm excited to be here to talk about the Community Resilience Partnership. As many of you will recall, the Maine Climate Council developed a 4-year climate action plan back in December of 2020. And one of the strong recommendations from that plan across many of the different topics that were addressed was creating an opportunity for grant funding and technical assistance for communities across the state so that communities could do their own climate planning and start doing the work of taking climate action and helping the state meet its greenhouse gas emission goals and climate resilience goals. So the Community Resilience Partnership is that vehicle. And today I'm going to go into the weeds a little bit with you around the details of the program and what we received as far as applications and grants that were made from our first round of funding. And I'll talk a little bit more about future rounds of funding as well. But before I do that, I need to make a plug. On June 17th, the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future and the Governor's Energy Office is hosting a conference called Communities Leading on Climate. And this is going to be spotlighting community action across the state on everything from energy efficiency and clean energy to resilience and adaptation. focused all day on community activities and resources, tools, and funding to help communities do their work. So this is going to be live and in person at the Augusta Civic Center. It will also, or portions of it will also be broadcast over the internet, so you can join in person or you can join remotely. Registration is at mainewon'twait.org. That's the link right there in the bottom of this slide. And registration will be open for about another week until June 10th. So please do register. We hope to see you in person. If you don't feel like joining in person, we hope to see you online. And it's going to be a fantastic day. There's really a lot going on across the state of Maine in our communities, and we're really excited to tell those stories. This is not the only time I'm going to talk about the conference today. I'm going to make a plug at the end of the show too. So really hoping that you'll join us. So as I said, the 4-year climate action plan highlighted technical assistance and grants to communities. That came across most strongly through Strategy F and Strategy G, which are focused on building healthy and resilient communities and building climate-ready infrastructure. But it also came through in the other categories around transportation, around our buildings, clean energy, and education and outreach. We ran a pilot project last year, testing out some ideas for this technical assistance and funding. We worked with 8 communities, 3 on the coast, 3 in northern Maine, and 3 in the Western Hills. And they really got in on the ground floor of some of the strategies that we were using to support communities and some early grant funding. From that pilot, we expanded into the full Community Resilience Partnership, which launched in December of last year. And as I said, and I'll talk more about, we had our first round of grant funding this spring, and we're gearing up for a second round of funding shortly. So the Community Resilience Partnership, its purpose is to provide grants and technical assistance to communities to help communities to reduce their carbon emissions, transition to clean energy, and become more resilient to the impacts of climate change. What we heard all the way through the climate planning process, through the pilot process, was that it's not just enough to provide communities with either grants or technical assistance. That has to happen together. It has to work together. And even more so, communities were looking for guidance on ways to align their work and activities with the state's goals and the activities that the state is going through. So one of the things that we've been able to provide through this partnership is a list of activities that communities can choose from for their grant proposals that align with the state's climate action plan. And because the alignment is so strong there, we're able to offer those grants with no match if communities select from this list of 70+ activities that range from installing EV charging to doing climate resilience planning, the whole 9 yards there. So this is really the purpose of the plan. The 2 maps here show where community capacity is greatest and where there's a real need for extra capacity. That's the map in the middle. And then the map on the right is a map of social vulnerability. So looking at demographics, socioeconomic status, a whole bunch of sort of non-climate factors that impact how well communities are able to respond to disasters or be proactive in their planning about resilience. And so in both maps, the areas of orange and red are places where we really want to focus our attention on communities that need extra help. So the Community Resilience Partnership was announced first on December 1st of last year by Governor Mills. It comes with $4.7 million from the state's general fund. We're going to spread that out over 3 rounds of grant making. And because it's in the state's budget, we expect that funding to continue into the future through the subsequent biennial budgets. So we're really excited about this being a long-term program that that the communities in Maine can count on. The partnership operates in 3 ways. The first is grants directly to communities. And as I said, these are grants that communities can use to pursue 1 or more of the activities on this list of 70+ activities. Or a community can come in with a priority that's not on that list and make a case to us that this is going to be important and meaningful, and will have outcomes that advance the state's goals within the community. These grants are $50,000 per community, and a community can come in with a couple of neighbors and do a joint application, in which case the joint application can apply for up to $100,000. So we really do encourage communities to come in with regional projects and projects that serve, that provide capacity or serve a need across more than one community. The second way that the program operates is by providing technical assistance to communities who need a little bit of help to get started. There's an enrollment process for the partnership that's a little bit more than just some paperwork. It involves passing a municipal resolution. It involves a couple of community self-assessments, and it involves some community workshops. And so we recognize that that work, in order to identify community priorities, may require some assistance by some communities. And so we offer grants to service provider organizations who can work with communities to work through that enrollment process, develop some community support, and create an early pipeline of projects that they want to apply for grant funding for. So that's on the front end of the project. And then on the back end, we have regional coordinators, 4 coordinators across the state. Each is responsible for 2 or 3 or 4 counties worth of communities. And these regional coordinators are there to help communities continue their momentum. So once they've gone through the enrollment process, once they've got one grant under their belt and a couple of projects, these regional coordinators are on hand to help communities develop future projects, maybe think about more complex projects, and most importantly, think about funding sources, whether they're from the state or federal funding sources. And so these regional coordinators are that extra capacity to help communities think in the long term about continuing to implement their priorities. So just to recap, we've got grants to communities, we've got grants to service providers to help communities on the front end get prepared, get enrolled, and generate some priorities. And then on the back end, we've got these regional coordinators who are helping communities keep their momentum going. So in our first round of grants, which we made this spring, we provided support to a total of 75 communities across the state. 29 of those are receiving those community action grants. So that's for projects that these communities are going to be doing. I'll talk a little bit more about what those projects look like, but as I said earlier, they range from EV charging installations to heat pumps to climate resilience plans, open space plans, other things like that. We made 24 grants to 29 communities. The numbers there work out because we had 2 regional collaborative grants that had more than one community in them. We also made 12 grants to those service provider organizations. Those 12 service providers are going to be supporting a total of 46 communities in getting ready for one of the next 2 rounds of grant funding. And so those 46 communities are on this map in yellow, and you can see we've got really good distribution around the state. It's not just coastal communities, it's not just southern Maine communities. We've got a lot of central, western Maine, and even a couple up in northern Maine. So we're really pleased with the footprint of our first round of grant funding. I'll talk more about that in a second. But we're most excited here about the response to the first round. Having 75 communities on board is a really great start. Our goal is to have 100 by the end of the first year of the program. So we're really, we're doing well here. And then, as I said, we made those 2-year contracts to the 4 regional coordinators, roughly dividing the state into 4 quadrants geographically. Those regional coordinators are there to help communities with ongoing implementation. Digging a little bit deeper into those 24 community action grants, these are the types of communities that received awards from us. As far as population goes, we had a good spread across small, medium, and large size communities, roughly 9 or 10 in each of the categories here, below 4,000, between 4,000 and 10,000 people, and then above 10,000 in population. So we're really pleased that both small and large communities took advantage of the first round of grants. Many of those were able to do that on their own, but some of them needed help. Some of them reached out to their regional planning organizations to help them get enrolled and develop applications. So even at these early stages, we saw that the assistance was really, really valuable. The other way we're looking at the data is from the perspective of equity and social vulnerability. So we had applicants from a mix, again, of communities that had high vulnerability based on demographics and socioeconomics. But we had a number, 14 here from low vulnerability communities, communities that probably have a little bit more capacity. And so our focus in future grant rounds is going to be boosting the number of applications we receive from those higher vulnerability communities. What's really great here is that our service providers in the first round really stepped up and engaged the smaller communities in the state and the more vulnerable communities in the state. So we're going to see these numbers rise in the coming rounds. And that's going to be a really important metric for us to track, is that we're meeting the needs of Maine's small, rural, and vulnerable communities. Digging in a little bit further here at the types of things that the grants will be funding in the first round, you'll see in the yellow box a little bit over $500,000 going towards emissions reductions activities. So this again ranges from installing EV chargers. We've got one town that's putting the money towards purchasing an electric school bus. A number of communities doing energy baselines, greenhouse gas inventories, trying to understand what their starting point is. Another community that's doing LED streetlight upgrades. So a lot of things that communities are doing to reduce their emissions are also saving money, which is a really great co-benefit of doing this work. And then a bit over $730,000 on climate resilience and adaptation activities. And so those range from vulnerability assessments to waterfront improvement projects, trying to coordinate many complex projects. Thinking about transportation networks and how to improve the resiliency of roadways. So lots of really great projects here. It will be interesting for us to see and track, what the balance looks like between emissions reductions and resilience and adaptation projects going forward. A couple more examples of projects, just so that you have a sense of what communities around the state are focused on, what their priorities are. We had 4 or 5 communities here looking at installing EV chargers. And those are along the coast, they're in central Maine, they're in the Western Hills. Communities are realizing that installing electric vehicle chargers are great options for their residents. They're also really great options for encouraging tourists to come into their communities. I was giving a talk very similar to this yesterday to the Economic Development Council of Maine, and making the case that while the EV market feels pretty small so far here in Maine, there's probably between 3,000 and 4,000 electric vehicles registered in the state today. There are larger markets around us. Not surprisingly, Massachusetts has about 20,000 electric vehicles on the road. But then if you look to our north, Quebec has over 130,000 electric vehicles on the road today. So there's a huge market for EVs and for EV chargers for tourist friends from the north coming to Maine, needing to charge their EVs as they get here. So electric vehicle chargers were a very popular grant request. If you're savvy, you'll know that Efficiency Maine also offers funding for EV chargers and heat pumps. And the way that we're coordinating with Efficiency Maine on this is that we're asking that the applicant come in, having already had a conversation with Efficiency Maine, knowing what their rebate for these installations from Efficiency Maine will be, applying that to their budget before they come to us to ask for additional funding to close the gap. 2 towns on opposite ends of the state are looking at US Route 1 as it passes through their community and thinking about flood resilience and how to manage the future of transportation through that, over that roadway, realizing that Route 1 is an economic artery, provides emergency access or emergency exit if it's a coastal community. And so they're taking a serious look at the complexity of doing a roadway improvement on such a major thoroughfare. I mentioned LED streetlight upgrades. Topsom is looking at that and has some plans to do LED streetlight upgrades around the town offices and the police station. Interestingly, CMP owns the light poles and the lights in the rest of the community. So Topsom has to look first at the municipally owned properties, and then we'll be coordinating with CMP on further upgrades across the town. Solar energy generation, the town of Limestone up in Aroostook County is working with the Maine School of Science and Mathematics to purchase an existing solar array. The solar array will power the town offices and will also provide some electricity to the school. And in a really creative proposal, the school is proposing to use the solar array as a teaching tool and exposing the science and math students to clean tech jobs here in Maine. So that was a really innovative partnership that we were glad to see come through from a small town. Two towns, Dover, Foxcroft, and Waterford, are looking at public health, particularly to extreme temperatures. Both are interested in installing heat pumps, both for the heating, but also for the air conditioning benefit in some public buildings and using those buildings as shelters for extreme weather events or high temperature days or very cold periods in the winter. So strong public health aspect coming through with those two communities. I mentioned earlier energy baselines and greenhouse gas inventories, trying to get a sense of what a community or what a municipality's carbon footprint is. So Orono and Windham are doing those. Bangor, Bath, Norway, and Saco are doing vulnerability assessments. Some of them are looking at their infrastructure. Others are taking a more community and social approach to vulnerability. So we've got some different flavors going on within that category. And then the two examples of regional cooperation, putting in joint proposals. One was a proposal from the MDI communities, Bar Harbor, Mount Desert, and Tremont. They are working on installing EV chargers, but also doing some really innovative grassroots organizing and outreach. They're going to be developing some climate ambassadors in each community to do a lot of the legwork on the ground of communicating the benefits of clean energy and resilience. And then Biddeford, Kennebunkport, and Kittery are working with the Southern Maine Planning and Development Commission to do some joint climate action planning, developing, each town will develop their own plan, but they're going to do it in a cooperative way. So they're feeding off of one another and that their plans will speak to their neighboring plans. So that's really exciting to see some communities get together along the coast in Southern Maine. This does not cover the entire swath of grants that we made, but should give you a sense of what's doable. If there's anything here that you'd like to see happen in your communities, I hope that you will be willing to talk up the Community Resilience Partnership with the leaders in your community. I share this slide. I'm not going to go into too much detail here. There's a lot of funding out there coming from the federal government, other sources in state government to provide money to communities, to provide technical assistance to communities. And the reason I put this information up here is just to demonstrate the value of doing planning, doing a community's homework, having a sense of what the priorities are, because when these funding opportunities come along, you want to have a project that's on the shelf and we're kind of ready to go. So the communities that have done some planning are in pretty good shape. Most of this funding is going to be around for 3 to 4 to 5 years. And so it's not too late at all for a community to get started, to do some early planning, to develop some concepts for projects, and apply for grant funding like this. The great thing about the Community Resilience Partnership is that we will provide funding for that type of planning. We can also provide funding for project scoping and early engineering work in order to have kind of a proof of concept for a project. and be ready to apply for some of these larger, more complex funding opportunities. Another example of a grant program in Maine that's new is the Maine Infrastructure Adaptation Fund. This program launched late this spring and is being administered by the Maine Department of Transportation. It has $20 million to support infrastructure improvement projects that really take climate change and resiliency to heart. And so kind of the two categories that I think about this fund is looking at infrastructure that could be vulnerable to climate change, whether it's sea level rise or riverine flooding or high heat or some other impact that climate change is causing. Looking at those vulnerable pieces of infrastructure and improving them to be more resilient in the face of those hazards. And then the other way to look at it is making sure that any infrastructure improvements or new construction is incorporating future projections of climate change into the design and construction of that project. So for example, the obvious example would be coastal infrastructure needs to think about what sea level rise projections are over the 50 or 75-year lifespan of that piece of infrastructure. And so that's what this fund is here to help support communities and regional applicants to do. The fund will support not only construction, but also that early stage project scoping and the engineering and design work that it requires to get a project up and ready for larger sources of funding. Right now, this infrastructure adaptation fund is somewhat limited to water and wastewater and sort of particular flood risk types of projects. That's because the $20 million that seeded this fund came from the American Rescue Plan Act federal dollars through EPA. And so it's got some EPA strings attached to it. In the future, we hope to expand this fund with dollars from different sources, and we'll be able to fund projects across, who knows, transportation, other types of infrastructure. This fund, the first round of grants just closed the end of last month, end of last week, actually. If there's money left over from the first round, DOT will be running another round probably in the coming months. So stay tuned for more information on this one. But this fund, we hope will be around in the future and will just gain utility as we go along. All right, I said I was going to make another pitch for the conference, and here it is. If hearing everything that I just talked about wasn't enough to get you to come to the conference, we have some fantastic keynote speakers lined up. In addition to our own Governor Mills, there speaking at lunchtime, we're going to have Gina McCarthy, who's the National Climate Advisor in the White House, who will be joining us. She is a firecracker of a speaker, and I just love listening to her speak anytime I get the opportunity. And hope that you all, again, will join us on June 17th, either in person or virtually for this event. Registration, again, is open until June 10th at mainewon'twait.org. If you're going to join us in person, we'll have lunch for you. It's going to be a really fantastic day, and hope to see you there. And with that, I am going to have one more slide before I stop talking. This is my contact information. If you want to send this along to any official in your town, please do. I'm happy to talk more in depth about the program with them, help them get connected with a service provider if needed, and just explain more of the details. As I mentioned, we have another round of grants with deadlines here, as you see, for service providers in August and for the communities in September. So thank you all for listening. I really look forward to some questions from you.
Thank you so much, Brian. Oh my goodness, there's so much exciting work happening, and and so many opportunities for us to do more work together. So thank you. We've got a ton of questions, but before we get into them, I am going to pile on and say Brian is absolutely right. If you have not heard Gina McCarthy speak in person, you have got to go click over right now and sign up for the conference. She is phenomenal, funny, inspiring, and really just a brilliant climate leader. We're so lucky to have her. So thank you. Would love to see all of you at that Communities Leading on Climate conference. I will put in a plug as well, because I am in the very lucky position of getting to moderate one of the panels where community leaders from 4 communities across the state are going to share what they are doing on energy efficiency. So I'm really excited about that and hope you'll all join us. There'll be a link to register for the conference in the follow-up email that goes out later this afternoon. That email will also include a link to the Community Resilience Partnership with instructions about how you can sign up and information that you can share directly with your town leaders to make sure they know about this. So look for that. And there'll also be contact info for Brian right there in that email, so you can have one-stop shopping to follow up. Let's get into some questions. Brian, quick first question. Is there a way to tell if my town has already applied or received funding?
Yeah, great question. So on the partnership's website, which is, it's a long address that I could put in the chat in a moment. We do have a page that lists all of the communities that received grants in the first round, as well as a list of all of the service providers in the 46 communities that they're going to be working with over the next 6 to 12 months. And so in the first round, we actually awarded grants to all of the communities that applied. We had enough funding allocated to the first round that was the case. We're able to make grants. So if you see your community's name on that list, they are enrolled and working on a grant. I can't promise that that's going to be the case in the next 2 rounds. I think with 75 communities now in the program, even $4-point-something million isn't going to go far enough. So we will probably have a more competitive process in the future. But right now, everybody who has applied for an action grant was awarded one.
I'm in the strange position of wanting lots and lots of communities to apply and wanting all of them to receive the funding they apply for. So I don't know whether we wanted to get more competitive or not. But if we were trying to play the system a little bit, would you recommend towns applying on their own, or is there some advantage to teaming up and working with one of those with the resource, say it again, the resource providers?
The service providers.
Service providers, thank you.
Yeah, so this is a good distinction, opportunity to make a distinction here. The service providers are there to help communities with the enrollment process and to develop their first community action grant proposal to us. Whether or not that service provider is then involved in the subsequent work under the community action grant is completely up to the community and the service provider. If they feel there's work to continue doing there, we're happy to see that happen. So there's no benefit there's no competitive benefit from our perspective with the grant proposals about whether you've done your work with a service provider or the town has done it on their own. We don't care one way or another. We just want to see as many communities as possible participating. The other way of looking at that question, though, is there a competitive advantage to partnering with your neighboring communities on a community action grant proposal for a particular project? Maybe it's a regional planning project, or maybe there's an interest in doing meeting some shared priorities with a joint proposal. I'm always a fan personally of regional collaboration. I think you get better projects that way, and I think you get more impactful projects when you're working with your neighbors. We haven't finalized the criteria for the next round of grants. I don't think that we'd be awarding any sort of special points for those regional grants compared to an individual grant. But I do think we get better projects when communities put their heads together.
Thank you. That's super helpful. And you mentioned the criteria, and it reminded me that when you first launched this program, GOPIF actually put out a series of webinars where communities could join and ask their questions when you're in the thick of the planning process and application. Do you anticipate that happening again for round 2?
We do, yeah. So we will be announcing the second grant round in the next couple of weeks. And then hosting those kinds of informational sessions where communities or just interested parties can join and listen in and ask their questions. We will also have a written Q&A period in the weeks following those informational sessions. We'll record those informational sessions, post them on our website so people who missed the live can follow up and watch it. And then we'll have a written Q&A period where potential applicants can submit their questions, and we'll respond to those with plenty of time before the applications are due.
The wonders of Zoom. There are so many ways that we can get this information out to communities. That's great news. I'm also curious, there's so many questions about the logistics here. Could communities conceivably receive multiple grants through the program? So say in the first round, we get a community planning process grant, and then that process is really productive and we come up with a ton of great ideas about what we want to do. Could a community then go back to the resilience partnership in round 2 or round 3 and get additional support? The reason we call
this a partnership is that we hope that this is an ongoing relationship between the program and communities. And so yes, absolutely, if a community does, gets a grant up front for doing a planning process, whether it's a greenhouse gas emissions baseline or a resiliency plan, and they want to come in for subsequent rounds of grants and seek funding for particular activities from those plans, absolutely, we'd like to see that.
That's fabulous. That's fabulous. And one more clarification about who's eligible. Are tribal communities eligible for this program as well?
Yes, they are. So municipalities and tribal governments are the 2 entities that are eligible. The third case would be a regional planning organization could apply on behalf of smaller towns in Maine that might lack the capacity to submit an application on their own or manage a grant on their own. So that's kind of a special case, but yes, so municipalities and tribal governments are eligible. We do have 2 tribal governments working with a service provider right now who will be going through the process to be ready to apply for a grant in the next round or the 2 rounds from now.
That's really good to hear. And it sounds like you've really structured this so that there's not you don't have to be a big city with full-time climate staff in order to benefit from this. That takes my mind directly to equitable access and equitable implementation of this program. So I might as well ask, how are we doing on equity? Do you feel like that the results are there? The process is certainly clear.
Yeah, so our first pass at kind of trying to understand whether we're hitting the mark there were those numbers that I showed a couple of slides in on, are smaller communities able to take advantage of this? Are the lower capacity communities, are the more highly vulnerable communities able to take advantage of it? And so far, I think we're doing okay for the first round. I mean, it's not surprising in the first round that it was the larger towns and cities in Maine applying for grants because they've already done their planning. They've got more robust staff and capacity to be able to do it. But in subsequent rounds, we're really going to be targeting a lot of our outreach at the smaller communities and encouraging our service provider corps to engage with those smaller communities. We actually structure the service provider grants so that if a service provider recruits communities with populations under 4,000 or highly vulnerable communities, they get actually more funding for doing that work. And so there's an incentive there, and also a recognition that it probably takes more work on the part of the service provider to provide that capacity to communities. So we're putting our money where our mouth is there with the service providers and trying to encourage them to go to smaller communities. And so we'll be tracking the numbers after subsequent rounds to make sure that that those investments are bringing about the right kind of outcomes that we're looking for. And then, we're also requiring within the proposals from the communities themselves, asking how they're addressing community equity with their projects, either through the outreach that they're doing or the stakeholder input that they're gathering through perhaps a planning process. How are they incorporating voices of underserved or highly vulnerable groups within the community? Or how are they ensuring that the benefits of that project are flowing to, again, underserved or more vulnerable people within their community? So it's going to be a learning process. We're also learning about federal initiatives, Justice 40, environmental justice, and we'll be working to incorporate that into the program as the federal guidance comes along too.
Gosh, there are just so many moving parts and so many individuals and communities with lots of different definitions of community that can benefit. I'm curious about whether, say somebody on the call today is part of a retirement community or a local nonprofit that does direct outreach to vulnerable populations. Could they be eligible under this program, or what advice would you give to those organizations for how to do their part in the climate planning and resilience work?
Yeah, it's a good question, and one that we got a number of times in the lead up to the last round. One question in particular from a retirement community, another from a school district, another from a community nonprofit. How do we participate in this? We know that only the municipal governments and only tribal governments are the eligible applicants. So our response is partner with your local government. And we saw that happen in a number of the proposals. As I mentioned, the Maine School of Math and Science partnered with the town of Limestone on the solar array. That was really exciting. The school district in Camden partnered with the town on the electric school bus. We saw some grassroots activities. The Dover Foxcroft project was really a citizens group that got organized and wanted to make an important public health outcome in their community and get the community cooling center up and running. And so they approached the city leaders and asked them to consider enrolling in the partnership and developing a proposal with them. So it was really a grassroots community effort there, which was great to see. So there's lots of ways for non-official organizations to participate in this.
I love that. And it's so interesting to see the sort of different directions that this program can flow. It could be a select board member who says, we have got to do this and makes the case to the community, or it could be the other way around. It could be a community member going to the select board saying, hey, you guys, we've got to do this. And the program is flexible enough to meet both. I'm curious about whether you've gotten any applications or heard any discussions focused on the social resilience that we will need as we face the climate crisis. Projects to strengthen our relationships across partisan divides, or work together with more civil discourse to tackle some of these pressing problems. Is that in the realm of what the Community Resilience Partnership Program would do? Definitely,
yeah. And it was interesting to see some of that come through in the first round. I mentioned some of the public health focused applications around cooling centers and things like that. I believe it's the town of Norway put in a proposal to look at community vulnerability, and they're going to do some work to define what that means, I think. So it's not looking at, is not so much looking at their sort of hard infrastructure, right? That's important too, but they're really looking at some more of the social questions around vulnerability, which I think is going to be interesting. And we'll be looking forward to learning from that, and maybe building out some new activities in that list that we can fund based on that project. But one of the really innovative ones, actually it's not so innovative at all, but it's not something that, you know, immediately comes to mind as a climate project, is the town of Waterford put in a proposal for a small amount of funding to construct a community garden. And, you know, the argument there was a really good one, was that we're building community, strengthening relationships, and bringing different parts of the town together through this project. And that builds our social resilience. And so even though it didn't have a really kind of a direct climate-y, whether emissions reduction or, you know, replacing some vulnerable infrastructure, it's definitely an important piece of the equation. And so, so we were happy to fund that.
What incredible creativity communities are bringing to this work. It is really exciting. And, you know, to put in another plug for the Community Climate Conference coming up, one of the things I love about the way that agenda is taking place is there's the sort of formal case study presentations in the morning, but there will also be time for folks to just kind of wander around and chat with each other, right? And check out what's underway and say, oh my gosh, a community garden. I didn't think of applying for partnership funds to do that, but wow, that would make a difference. It just seems like we can find inspiration in a lot of different places here. I am wondering, let's see, we've got a question about how to be creative with funding that goes to some of our larger municipalities. So a place where, you know, there may be communities within the municipality that tend to be underinvested in relative to other areas. How do we make sure that those funds get invested equitably within the community?
Yeah, that's a good question, and one that we're going to keep working on with this program. I mean, right now, I mentioned earlier the instructions for making a proposal discuss how to incorporate either the input or the benefits to different community or different populations within a single community. And you know, there's a question in the chat here about island communities, right? And so we know that there are, for example, with Portland, there are several island communities that are part of the city of Portland. But and so you know, for those island communities, we encourage you to work with the city on a proposal that helps direct some of the benefits of projects to your island community. So this is going to be a work in progress. We're also going to be offering, so this is not just a grant and technical assistance program, but we're also going to be offering some trainings to communities, and one of which we hope to do around equity and thinking about how you do engagement to the different types of populations within your town or within your community. We're going to be looking for opportunities to translate some of the federal programs and guidance down to local applications. So thinking about, again, Justice 40, things like that. How do we incorporate that into this program so that it filters down to a municipal or a tribal level as well? So I don't have a real great answer for you right now, but it's definitely center of mind for us as we continue to evolve this.
Will you remind us what Justice 40 is?
Yes. So I'm not going to get it 100% right. Somebody else might have a better sense of it than I do, but the general idea is that 40% of a particular grant program or investment would flow to vulnerable or environmental justice communities. And so, you know, one of our sort of internal targets for the Community Resilience Partnership is that over the first 5 years of the program, that 40% of our investments will go to either highly vulnerable communities or small communities in Maine. And whether that is just number of grants or whether it's grant dollars, we haven't quite nailed down the metric yet for us, but that's a target that we're going to be keeping an eye on over the first 5 years of the program.
That's terrific. And this is probably a conversation for another day, but I know that the Climate Council is in the process of taking a fresh look at the whole climate action plan through that equity lens to make sure that we are meeting the goals that are the sort of hard goals of emissions reduction and clean energy adoption, but that we're doing it in a way that prioritizes the needs of the folks who are most impacted and often least served by the programs, or have been historically. That how can we solve multiple problems at once right now?
Yeah, there's been just a ton of work over the last 6 to 10 months by the new equity subcommittee of the Climate Council that was established after the plan was released. And so the equity subcommittee took the state's 4-year climate action plan, took a magnifying glass to it, and provided a whole bunch of recommendations, basically almost line by line, for how the plan could be improved from an equity perspective. And now it's going back again to the working groups for the Climate Council to incorporate all of that into the work that's going to be happening. So big focus over the last year plus on equity.
It's just so important. Thank you for that leadership. And speaking of leadership, this is the question that makes my stomach hurt, but I've got to ask it. Will this program continue no matter what the gubernatorial election leads to in November, or is this get it in now and get organizing to make sure that I'm letting my politics show, which you get to do it. I love that, but I won't make you do it, Brian.
The funding is in the state's budget. It is a line item in the budget now. So theoretically, subsequent funding should be there every 2 years, every time we do a state budget for the program. Subsequent administrations could change the shape of the program, but the funding to back it is there, and the legislative language is there.
Whew. Big, deep breath. Thank you. It's just so important to see this work. Really, I mean, we're just getting started. There's a lot to be done. And so it is really reassuring to hear that there is a long-term plan for meeting this, and that it's actually in the state budget. Brian, what do you think we should all take away as our one big message, that when we're going for a walk later this afternoon or sitting around with friends this weekend, that we say, I went to this great program on Friday, here's what you should know?
For me, it's just, holy cow, there are 75 communities doing this work in Maine right now. Like, I mean, if could you name 70? I couldn't name 20, right? Before we got this program started. The first round really did exceed our expectations as far as the interest from across the state. I'm already, talking with more communities that are interested in the next round. So, it's just really inspiring for me that there was such a response to the first round of this program, and that so many communities are wanting to make this a priority. It's just, it makes me excited to show up and to do this program every day. So that's what I take away from it. I hope that others hear the opportunity for their community to get involved, that they saw examples of projects that could work in their community. So please reach out to me if you want more information. Feel free to give my information to leaders in your town. I'm happy to make this as big as we can across the state. So.
Well, the success and those 75 communities, and that's a good teaser. That's how I'm going to start the conversation with my friends over the weekend. I'll say, can you name 75 communities in Maine? Guess what? It is really a testament to the energy and the leadership and just the incredible effort that that you've put in, Brian, and that the whole team at GOPIF. So thank you for doing this work, and thank you for sharing it with us today. Thanks to everybody who has joined today. This is another one of those programs that is made to be shared. So when you get the follow-up email this afternoon with the link to the recording, the registration link for the Communities Leading on Climate conference, and the link to information about how to apply for the Community Resilience Partnership, just forward it to everybody you can think of. We would love to let's get even more communities in round 2. So thank you. We will be taking a break from our Lunch and Learn next Friday, but we will be back the following week on June 17th for a program called Supreme Capture: How the Far Right Has Packed Our Supreme Court and What We Can Do About It. We'll be joined by Katie O'Connor, who's the Deputy Chief Counsel at Demand Justice, and Doug Lindner, who's the Advocacy Director for Judiciary and Democracy at the League of Conservation Voters. It'll be a phenomenal conversation, and hope to see you all there. And in the meantime, have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much again, Brian.
Thank you, Kathleen. It's a pleasure.